22nd, 2018 to order. 21st, thank you, to order. And after roll call.
Okay, Gaffney.
Here.
Horstein.
Here.
Meggs. Here. Scylla. Here. Kelly.
Here.
Thank you.
And if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like, before I ask for approval of the agenda, I wanted to, I'm sorry, I'll approve the agenda. I was talking about the minutes, so do I have a move to approve the agenda?
I move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Now would be open time for public to raise items not on the agenda. Public may raise any issue that is within the sanitary district's jurisdiction, but we cannot hold any discussion at this time on that. Any members of the public? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to the standing committees report out. The Finance Committee, I was unable to attend. At the last minute, Michael was kind enough to step in. Thank you for that. And if you'd like to then, either Michael or Tom?
I'll give a report and I can comment. We reviewed the interim financial statements and we had a discussion about it. They looked fine, but we wanted to add some basic information about the three outstanding bond issues. So that'll be for the quarterly report and it'll show the amount of principal outstanding. Excuse me, we wanted to do. And then we reviewed the cost sharing agreement with San Anselmo and discussed that we're very much in favor of interagency cost sharing type projects. So it's an agenda item. And then took a look at the monthly capital program. And the question that came up there was we had to reject bids on two major projects because they came in too high. And they're on the project list for our permit, which we're appealing.
Right.
And so we're going to have to, right off the bat, tell the regional board we need to reschedule. I don't think it's a big problem, but, that's a good deal when I'm getting locked in these timing, because something always happens on major projects.
That's right.
So, I don't think it's a big deal, but we'll see.
So do we have to ask their permission for that change? No?
Well, what we'll do is I'll compose an email update to Vince Christensen at the regional board, letting him know about the changes to those projects and what the new schedule is. And they had given us verbal assurances. I can't recall if the NPDS document itself has this allowance, but where if there's a valid need to shift the schedule, that they should be accommodating to that. So we'll put that communication on the record to the regional board and then see what they come back with.
So it's more of a notice than a
Yeah.
approval?
Yeah. And the permit is a 5-year permit. So our next required progress report, I think, will actually be January of 2019. So technically speaking, that would be the time, that we could update them as to what the progress is on those items, but we won't wait until then. But each January, during the next 5 years, we'll be giving them an annual update.
And our plan would be to still, to do those projects within the 5-year permit window.
Right, they're still going to get done, they're just parts of them are going to ship, yeah.
And then we reviewed the legal costs.
Down again. Good.
And we made note that the smartest thing we did was increase the budget. So that it's easy.
Statistics.
No, but it is going down. It's going down consistently. We have a couple of months, you look at a year, and we have, every quarter we have a bump.
We have some big legal.
Right.
But actually, we've been meeting for 5 out of the last 7 months, we've been meeting the old budget.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've been below it.
Yeah, we've been below it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. The next Standing committee out is the Central Marin Sanitation Agency, which you were not able to attend. I did. Michael attended via teleconference, so I'll give that report if that's okay.
Why don't I just give the background?
Okay, that's fine. Sure.
For some time now, we have been working with CMSA to make an agreement to actually generate enough green energy at CMSA to be able to sell it back to somebody. And so there's been a lot of discussion back and forth for actually several years now, but it's been getting more intense about who are we going to sell it to, and really the options are PG&E and Marin Clean Energy. And Marin Clean Energy offered a lot more money,
10.5 cents about.
10.5 cents per kilowatt hour versus
7.9.
Yeah, but it was movable.
Yeah.
The PG&E's was not constant, and it's 10.5 for 5 years. 10 years, I'm sorry. Well, that was one of the things we had to decide, whether it was 10, 15, or 20 years. And there were some attorneys that did not like exactly the contract, but no contract is ever completely perfect one way or the other. And the district opted.
Well, wait a minute, why don't you explain what the concern with the contract, because it was a valid concern.
Well, the concern was what happens if we don't ever, in the term of that contract, create enough energy to be able to sell it back to Marin Clean Energy? Are there going to be any penalties? And I thought it was pretty clear that it said we will sell back to Marin Clean Energy exclusively that which is, and the word was excess, that which we don't use at CMSA. Because right now we were producing, I believe it is roughly 95% of the power that we use at CMSA. But there was some concern that we could open ourselves up to litigation if somehow we didn't meet and sell something back at some time. So we changed a little bit in the agreement to basically say we're going to produce somewhere between 0 and possibly this amount, but we don't know yet. And in fact, one of the things was that we had to put how much the certificate on the actual generator was rated. And we don't know that yet until PG&E, until we hook up and begin to actually. So at any rate, after a long discussion, and it was an interesting discussion. There were valid points, but not unanimously, but.
Well, let's be clear. The power companies are required by the federal and state governments to determine their sources of power. So they have to say, I can't recall the exact term, but it was clearly enumerated in there. The power companies, have to say, because it's the whole Enron thing, you know, we're going to run out of power and we're not really in. So the concern was that we would be listed as a source of power, and then we wouldn't be a source of power, and so they get punished if their power, they can't provide the power they promised.
We're listed as base load.
Right, and we didn't want to be. So
we're not base load because we're not guaranteed power.
that's right. So that's why the simple change that we made, which they have to accept, by the way, that was our motion. It was actually my motion, because one of the issues is that we had a lot of requests, Central Marin Sanitation Agency had a lot of requests to change the contract, and Marin Clean Energy didn't change anything. And they say that's because there's too many agencies dealing with governments, power sources, sanitation, and they don't want to change their contract. So they have to change that. If they're not changing that, the deal's off.
And as far as, and the other thing was, that deal was good until yesterday.
Yep.
The 10.5 cents. So something had to be done, or back to square one. And in fact, the day after the meeting, Jason filled out the contract and sent it to them and used all of their words, but we just filled in the blanks. probably a different way than what they thought. Nothing as of yesterday has
Okay.
been sent back.
That's okay. Good.
So as far as we know, it's a done deal.
Okay, so that was a good meeting. It was one of those where we had to really kind of work through with our colleagues,
Yeah.
because it didn't go swimmingly, but that's what we're
Yeah,
doing.
I'm glad you voted for it, because I would have voted for it, the same.
Yeah,
And another something.
well, I'm sorry, I think it was a lot, me and Michael were the ones who kind of broke through the logjam.
Good.
We were the ones who got it done.
Yeah, well, that's good. I know Jason wanted to do it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's a neat project. We're selling energy, we produce a plan. But we found that Marin Clean Energy, we had a big committee in here last month, pro Marin Clean Energy. And I told them they were very difficult for Central Marin to work with. They were intransigent on a sloppy contract.
And so did they change it?
Pardon me?
We changed our-
They did a few things.
There was a place that we're allowed to fill in, which said how much power we sell. So rather than put something we didn't feel we could meet, we put from 0 to, and I think we figured out how many kilowatt hours we could possibly do in 24 hours and times 365. So from 0 to 1,750.
And that's what they had the opportunity to accept or reject by yesterday, and they accepted it?
We haven't had rejection.
No, they haven't heard, we haven't
Never
heard.
heard a rejection.
Oh. Okay. But it was a sunset that we assume acceptance?
Well, the cost that they're offering is going down substantially. So it's not 10.5 anymore for anybody who signs up now, it's less. And we're locked in for 10 years. So I think that's good. I think we've done right by the ratepayers. We've gotten them a high amount of money, which probably we'll end up paying for it here, so.
We're supposed to save money.
We're saving money over there, we may not be saving money over here.
Well, we haven't heard whether they accepted it. They
That's-
were
we haven't
supposed to
heard if they
accept
heard
or
that.
refuse
But
it by yesterday.
they have not refused it, and it was put in on time.
And it was their
Oh.
deadline,
Okay.
it was a made-up
Got
deadline.
it. Okay, so we're
So they can
presuming,
extend
Yeah,
it. if they
and
want.
we'll check, and we'll know more next week. Next meeting. Okay, North Bay watershed,
Yes,
did you meet?
yeah, we met actually at NWD, which is kind of nice for change. So just to start with, the conference is April 6th. There's some hinting that it might fill up. It's now 115, I think, per person. I have the schedule here if you want to look at it. Let's see. So they had a speaker who came in and talked about, again, the Proposition 68, which is the Parks Bond. And it's going to be in June of this year. And there is some resistance. The Sierra Club will not endorse it. I think there's a potential dam going to be built down near the Kern River. But it will cover a ton of stuff, especially for watershed areas, fisheries, habitat restoration, etc. So he did a really nice presentation. And then Krishna did a presentation, which was very delightful. And he talked about the history of MMWD, which I found to be fascinating. They have 245 employees. The water supply was started in 1912. They have 62,000 connections. They serve 187,000 people. It covers 147 square miles, 7 reservoirs, 21 acres of pristine watershed. And he also went into bike miles, recreational miles, etc. So it was really great to hear that, because I'd never heard that comprehensive report of our water district. They also have a couple of young people, and I can't remember their titles, who are helping them do fish counts, etc. And it was so nice to see young people doing this kind of work. So, and then let's see, what else did they talk about? I think we're at the 83% capacity on the reservoirs.
That was before the rain.
What?
That was before, it's been raining the last few days.
Yeah, so it's gonna. Average rainfall is 52 inches. Past year was 96. So I don't see what happens this year. We've got our March month that's going to make up. And what else? There was more discussion about steelhead and coho and shrimp and endangered species. I guess that's sort of most of it in a nutshell.
All right, thank you.
And the next meeting is the conference. There will not be a meeting, it's the conference, and that's in Petaluma. There'll be a wine tasting at 4 o'clock for 1 hour.
Then you go to your
So
meeting.
get your designated driver, huh?
Then the meeting starts.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Consent calendar is next. The first item is to approve the meeting minutes, and before we do the consent calendar, I'd like to pull the meeting minutes for just one quick, small, minor point, if I may. Page 4 of 6 of the minutes, above where it says item 12, it says President Kelly, and then the next paragraph, Director asked.
Where are you?
Page 4 of 6 of the meeting minutes.
And item 12.
Above item 12, item 11. It just simply says, Director asked if this work is included. Director who?
It was mixed.
Okay, fine.
Well, you know, I have a comment on that. Too.
Okay.
And it's an update of when we're going to bid the gig.
Okay.
Guaranteed investment contract. What do we think we're going to bid that? It hasn't been bid yet.
We put that a little bit on the back burner just because of the workload impacts with Julie Blue, leaving the district, and the impacts that's had on business and administrative services. So we are still planning on following through with Martha and the company at Sperry Capital. So it's, do we have any, do you want to?
Where is
Sure,
it now?
I'd like to.
Where are the proceeds now?
They're in the trustee account.
The trustee?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're with BNY Mellon.
He's going to pay us virtually zero.
Right.
And Leif would pay us 1 point something.
We could transfer it to Lake
Why
while we're
don't we
working on the
transfer it
gig.
to Leif
Mhm.
and get 1%? It's a bunch of money,
Mhm.
25 million.
Yep. Yep.
1% of 25 million, you guys figure that out. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I'd like to train, because we have to stay there a month, I think.
Probably.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's fine. I can absolutely keep that and take care of that.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Can I, does
Okay.
that include the financials?
Interim financial statements, yes. Do you have questions on those?
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry, I'm just kind
No,
of
that's fine.
stressed out.
That's fine.
So on page 1 of 3, I just had a quick question about Friends of Cordillera Creek,
1 of 3.
It's
the check register.
Check
The
register.
check register, and it's line 41.
We discussed that. Friends of Cordillera Creek.
Yeah, I thought that's over.
Yeah, so that came up at Finance Committee meeting, and I'll explain briefly. We were expecting that, so just for context, so this is in reference to the supplemental, what's called the Supplemental Environmental Project, or SAP, that we were obligated under one of our prior enforcement orders. And the district was obligated to provide, I think it's $250,000 in funding assistance to the, get the name of the park, is it Halbrown? Is it Halbrown Park? And that's that kind of wetlands park by Marin General Hospital. And the district had been anticipating all along that most or all of that funding contribution would be used for the construction, which is where the heavy spending would occur. And they did use quite a bit of it for the construction funding, but near the end of construction, and this was done unfortunately without consultation with the district, but I don't know that it matters that we had a say in it. Between the county and the other entities, they decided to close out the construction monies or the construction costs with monies that they had from the county, and to continue to use the RVSD funding commitment monies for some ongoing biological monitoring and follow-up activities. So these are small, relatively small dollar activities that will be going on for the next 2 to 3 years. And so what it means really for us simply is that we can't completely close that out until they finish those activities. So they'll be using our remaining funding contribution to pay for some of the biological monitoring. So it's a little bit of a headache for us in terms of carrying it when we had expected to have it completely closed out. But that's why you're seeing that payment, and you'll occasionally see probably a handful more over the next 1 to 2 fiscal years. But again, up to but not exceeding the $250,000 commitment. So I haven't looked at this in great detail because I actually found out about this somewhat haphazardly. I was driving by the area and saw some of the Friends of Corbindale Creek people and others working out there, and stopped to chat. And this is actually how I became aware of this. and then we saw this. But there's some possibility, and it remains to be seen, how much money they're going to need to do the finishing of the biological monitoring. So there's a slim chance they may not even end up utilizing the entire $250,000. So we would have preferred to have it pay for all the construction and be closed out, just so we could, again, close it off our books. But that's why you're seeing that bill.
So as long as we're not exceeding it, it's not a problem.
No, and the accounting and reporting that they do is
Clean,
yeah.
gone.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping.
I kind of like us supporting the ongoing monitoring.
Yeah, it's not a bad use of the monies. They actually, what they were doing out there was some refreshing of the native veg replanting. The project itself, I think by all accounts, is a pretty great success. What they did was put in the great big oversized culvert so the tidal flows can move in and out of the marsh more readily. So by all accounts, the actual project has been, it looks very successful. And our monies are going to be used for some of the ongoing biological monitoring.
Okay. Thank you. And then line 55, same page. Jill, is this a company? Jill?
No, so that's Jill Barnes she's been in front of the board a handful of times. Jill's one of our contract project managers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, we asked about the Marin County tax collector as well. I also know about Joe Barnes, that we have to pay property tax on our office because it's outside.
Mm-hmm. We also have to pay sanitation services.
Yes.
What?
We pay sanitation services.
Standard.
Any other questions on the consent calendar?
I don't think we're going to fight their
No. We're not changing our language, though.
We also didn't get to change our logo.
Not yet.
Because the report is for January
I move to accept the consent calendar.
Do you have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Okay, let's open up number 7, discussion and direction on repealing ordinance number 66 related to the regulation of maintenance of private sewer laterals and adopting ordinance number 100, private sewer lateral ordinance. Now, this is a discussion. There's no board action. Can I have a staff report?
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize, my voice is a little bit scratchy, just recovering from a cold. So what this action deals with, and tonight is discussion and direction only. We'll be bringing this action for this item back next month with the required public hearing and the appropriate advance posting. But what this is essentially a cleanup and consolidation of the series of ordinances that we passed starting back in 2014 when the board approved Ordinance 66, which was, we generally refer to as the lateral ordinance. And that ordinance, that action was taken under the requirements of the 2013 cease and desist order. The Ordinance 66 was fairly complete on its first cut, but we recognized right away from feedback from stakeholders like the real estate community and others that there were a number of items we wanted to modify. So there was a series of minor amending ordinances that are listed in the staff report, and some of these were as simple as extending or pushing out the effective date, 1 year, so that we could work with the stakeholders to work out a few of the bugs and the requirements. And we also eventually came back with an ordinance, a separate ordinance that then covered the common interest condominium properties, because we hadn't quite figured out how to deal with them in the first ordinance. And so now we're basically going on 4 years into having the lateral ordinance in effect. The programs, I think as the board is aware from past reports, has really reached a steady state. It's going, very well. Business processes are in place. We're averaging, somewhere between 600 and 650 laterals a year. And so what this action is doing is taking all those ordinances and consolidating them into one cleaned up ordinance, so that for ease of reference and administration by staff and by the users of the ordinance. And then the other thing that it's doing is, through the last couple of years, we have of course had some lessons learned, as was to be expected, and identified some areas we wanted to update. And those are listed on the second page of the staff report, and I'll just point them out briefly, but I think those newer items are ones that we'd like to make sure the board is clear on this evening, because they aren't just administrative updates, they are actually, substantive new parts. And those deal with some language that we came up with to clarify how shared laterals are handled, and that's the situation where you have 2 or more properties, meaning single-family properties, that are physically connected to a single common lateral. And those come in many shapes and sizes, which makes them very difficult to have a single cookie-cutter approach to. We also recognized that there was not a clear path to compliance for publicly owned facilities like schools and parks, College of Marin, hospitals, and so we have added a section to provide a path towards compliance for the publicly owned facilities. And lastly, we have updated the enforcement language in the ordinance to make that something that we think is a little more practical than the prior language. And we'll touch on each of those just very briefly to point them out. If you don't have these, actually, you know what, let's do this. Let me just stop there, because you're going to have, and I'm sure there's questions from the board, and we can go through those one at a time. So after this evening's discussion, we'll take whatever feedback and direction we get this evening from the board, update the draft ordinance 100, and bring that back next month for consideration of approval. And with that, I'll hand it back to the board.
Okay, do you have questions, Tom?
Yeah. Well, I read this and I think it was very complicated and thorough, And I know that we wanted to remove the reference allowing for RCD on private property.
Right.
But we kept it on section 14C. It said, I guess that's just to say we have that ability. It's not to say we're going to do it. Because we decided that we don't want to do that.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
It's just stating we have the power, we could do it.
We could do it, and to add to that point is, I know Director Kelly, you mentioned some considerations on this topic as well in the past. what we think we want to actually do going forward is, rather than rely on our ability to go in and physically, remove and replace a lateral on private property, which has a lot of downsides to it, we will, under this updated ordinance, most likely rely on imposing a daily fine on the property that's in violation, notify them, of course, of that, because this is a very significant action, and then that fine amount would then be attached to the tax rolls through the Marin County tax rolls. And we think that that's a much more practical approach than actually trying to go on to private property and get involved in all of the complications of that. So we didn't want to preclude some of the legal authorities that we have, but the intent here is that in the future, if we actually had to, we would rely on a fine mechanism and not the go enter the private property and replace the lateral mechanism.
And on that topic, because you and I did discuss that, do we have the statutory authority to assess fines? And if so,
Yes.
what's our limit?
I'll have to look and see if there's any particular limit. The code does, I have to pull it up, but the 14B references Article 8 of the Sanitary Code, and it provides for enforcement of violations of any ordinance, including fines. I'll have to look and see.
Well,
if
maybe
there are
we ought
maximum.
to add including fines.
We will, we already have that note in here. We talked about it right before.
I'd like to put in how much the fines could be up to, because Greg and I talked about the ability to, this is the last 10% of people who don't change the laterals when they buy their homes, and we're chasing them, and I've felt strongly that we should have them chase us. So you slap them with fines, and I think this board should have the authority to waive the fines if we want to, if we can do that legally. But, let somebody realize that, oh, I've got $9,000 in fines here, I better change that lateral. The point is to get the lateral changed, and to have the people who are in violation of the lateral regulation chase us the last 10% rather than have us chase the last 10%, because it seems to be hard for us to get that last 10%. And that's why we had in the prior lateral ordinance the right to hire. We're just going to go in and do it, except we all know we don't want to go into somebody's property. It's just too much,
We kill their prize work.
Right, yeah.
And in some cases also, it can be difficult to reach the responsible party because of, say, the ownership structure
Yep.
of the parcel. So having a substantial financial penalty show up on the tax bill or something is one way to, ultimately, one way I think we've kind of put it is, this is really the final attention getter, because this is precluded just for the reminder, as a reminder to the board, this is precluded by 4 sequential enforcement letters, the last of which is, I think maybe 2 of them are certified mail, et cetera. Maybe they're all certified mail.
No, it's-
But yeah, this is when we've tried for, in some cases, up to a year to get their attention and have gotten no response. And so this would be the final step, and attaching a hefty fine that goes on the tax roll hopefully gets somebody's attention. So they come find us, as you put it, Doug, and then we can resolve the situation.
Okay. Other questions?
I have talked to Greg about this before the meeting. There's one place in here, there's these abbreviations, it's just housekeeping stuff. If you could write those out.
Yeah, that's
Very
the
interesting.
NASCO, the references to the NASCO and FACTB center, so we can add those to the, I think, to the definitions list at the front of the draft ordinance.
What is that?
They show up in a couple
National
of,
Association?
it's the National Association of Sanitary Sewer Contractors. I have to look it up. Yeah, it's a long abbreviation. It's
Okay.
NASSCO, but yeah, we'll add those.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll spell those out now to the definitions.
Okay, the other thing, on page 9, the section 10, for me, to keep it more simple, I need a definition on what mandatory testing is. And Greg, you and I talked about this on the phone. I just
Right.
wondered if Because if the public reads this, you have, I think, the information here or within it, but I just think something really, boom, something easy to
Yeah,
understand. Because people, when you see the word mandatory, they want to be really clear about what does that really mean.
yeah, I agree, Pam, and when Catherine and Andrew and I were reviewing this earlier today, I forgot to mention that, I have it in my notes. And I think what we're looking for is a very clear first statement under section 10 that says something along the lines of, the following, or the following situations or the following considerations result in mandatory testing. In other words, make it clear that this is an action right at the outset. And as you pointed out, Pam, when we spoke, for a layperson reading this, it could be a little confusing because, for example, number 2 immediately uses the word optional.
Right.
Which we have for a reason, that clause is in there for a very practical reason, but to see it right after you saw the words mandatory testing at the header is a little confusing. So we'll add some language at the opening to section 10 that says, in so many words, mandatory testing is required under the following conditions outlined in this section or something to that effect.
But I don't even think you need the word mandatory, because I just wrote when testing is required, but I don't even think that's appropriate for the heading, right? It's sewer laterals, testing requirements. Or,
And some of them,
Yeah.
sometimes are mandatory.
because
That's true.
if it's required, it's mandatory.
Yeah.
So that's, and you're right, we're seeing mandatory testing and then optional.
And the reason you have optional is because what's required is a pressure test, but you can do the TV or inspection first.
Right.
So you ought to put down what's required. Required is a pressure test, like 4 PSI or something like that. Their optional test prior to the more expensive,
Yeah, and that, we added that clause number, that second clause you see there was added a couple years back in response to some of the feedback from the stakeholders in the community, where we had been communicating to them in what we thought was helpful advice that said, look, if in doubt, don't go straight to a pressure test. We were, go ahead and do a visual inspection first and have a professional give you a good sense of whether you have any chance of having the test be successful. And if you don't, or if the conclusion is that you don't, then don't go through with the mandatory testing,
I was going to suggest we put that in. There's no reason to have a pressure test or even a video test if the homeowner or business owner is going to replace the lateral. It's just an additional
Yes, they've
expense.
already
I think
included-
I'd like to spell that out. I mean, I'm replacing the laterals. I know from the old owner it's crap. Why do I need to get a pressure test? It's going to be another $250.
That's what we're trying to clarify.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so the inspection is like 150 TV.
Yeah.
You're right, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If you
so
know
they-
it,
so
so you
we
waive
had-
them both. You waive the video. you waive
If
the
you're
pressure
sure, don't do either
And
one.
that's what,
initially.
the feedback we were getting was, in the old, was if I read this literally, it tells me, no matter what, first thing I gotta go do is go do a pressure test, and I know it's gonna fail, and I just wasted, whatever, hundreds of dollars. And we said, okay, great, so we added this clause to make it clear that you could skip that step and do that. So we'll clean that up.
Can you make that clearer?
Yeah, we can make that more clear.
Yeah, this is a big piece of work.
Yeah, and this, of course, was a huge focus of the, the feedback from the real estate community and others, so.
I've worked more on the heading. I think you could say, section 10, sewer lateral testing, and then maybe specifications and circumstances if you want to have something after. But, this is all about, this whole section is about sewer lateral testing, right?
True.
When it's required, when
When
it's
it's not.
optional, well, we're going to tell you about it.
So strike mandatory.
Yeah.
Okay, very good, very good, okay.
I got one more thing about the dates. Working on the general plan for Fairfax, there was a lot of dates we had to put in to reference when we were going to get these things done. So either highlight them or maybe create a side note, or at the end of the document, maybe put a note page or something.
Yeah.
Because those dates, there's 3 or 4 of them. There's one in the 22, 2022, 2024, and 2028.
Right,
If
and
they're missed,
they're important dates.
yeah, so
So-
I would just highlight something somewhere
Okay.
to be a reference.
What we could do in those, there's two sections that are very similar. One is the common interest properties, which we already have a sequence of dates set for. And we've replicated those dates, only staggered for today's timelines for the publicly owned facilities, meaning starting, they still have the same amount of time, 2 years for this, 2 years for that. But those dates you see listed are very critical milestones, so we can bold those, or in some other fashion, make them very clear that these are the dates you need to focus on. And again, that's, for example, section 13, where you see those dates like 2020, 2022, et cetera. So we'll, at a minimum, bold those and make them very prominent.
Because they're not in, do you have, is this a resolution? This, I'm a little confused on this attachment A. Is it the whole thing or just?
No, it's an ordinance. It's a,
Ordinance?
yeah,
Okay.
it's an ordinance.
Now, is ordinances like city municipalities, you have a first reading and then you have a second?
Well, we're working on it. We're not in it. We haven't finished.
Okay,
This is not an action item tonight.
But we don't have that process.
Right.
Okay, just curious. All right, thank you.
Tom?
So we'll bold those down, make them more prominent, given their importance.
Right, so repealing 66, don't we have to repeal all the other ones too? 67, 68, 69, 71, 72, 73?
I think
That's
that's
what-
in the action, but not in the title.
Yeah, the intent is to repeal all of them and replace them with this.
Good. And then my other comment is, we did our initial ordinance based on a lot of the work done by East Bay Mud agencies and others.
Correct.
And hadn't they have had those ordinances on for years before us.
About 5 years, about 4 or 5
And
years.
didn't they come up with this? I mean,
Well, we borrowed heavily from theirs, and we also consulted with their staff quite a bit in the early days of developing this, which is why, for example, they told us, be ready to do a series of amending ordinances as you get feedback from your stakeholders, which turned out to be very valuable advice. Be willing to extend deadlines so you can work out, glitches. And so absolutely, Tom, they've been about 5 years ahead of us on this, and we've tried very hard to beg, borrow, and steal every piece of advice we can get from them.
yeah, but I mean, my point was, yet we still have had to make all these, I would have
Right.
thought they would have been further along, that's my point. Are we now, they're gonna copy what we're doing probably?
Well, they've had their own struggles, they've had some ups and downs, because they have 5 different agencies, satellite agencies, trying to operate under one umbrella ordinance. 4 of those agencies delegate administration to East Bay Mud, and the 5th agency has chosen to retain administration at its own local level. So they have certainly had their own headaches on this as well. Yeah, I think it's Berkeley. yeah.
That's the lady who referred to it as the kingdom of Berkeley.
Yes, the kingdom of Berkeley. Yeah.
I just had a couple questions about the things that caught my eye. In section 8, because we jumped to, what legally people, whether we want to walk on property and stuff.
Right.
The statement under 1, the district engineer is hereby authorized to inspect private laterals. That's a legal right? We have the right to enter the property. Doesn't that exist before we pass this resolution?
We have the right to enter the property if those certain conditions are met, which was at the beginning of that. So
Right,
it's-
but I guess I'm just asking, is this ordinance authorizing people to walk on property? That's
No,
not.
our code, that's right.
It exists.
You're right, and so perhaps instead of hereby authorized, we could say pursuant to X, Y, Z, the
Yes.
engineer is authorized.
That's the-
to-
Right,
That's right.
and then down on number 2, the district shall have the right of entry when access is required for the following purposes. That also sounds like this is
Is enabling.
conferring that ability, and I can't imagine that this is conferring that ability.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd like to cite what actually gives us that legal right.
Okay.
Good point.
And I believe that is,
It's the code.
it's the sanitary code.
Yeah,
so-
oh, I have no doubt that we have the right to.
So we'll cite
But I
that.
thought gee, if I'm reading this for the first time, I would say, well, Who gives you the right?
Okay.
I mean, I know we do it all the time, we walk on people's property, we
Yeah.
fix their stuff.
Okay.
So is this going to require amendment too?
It's certainly possible, you know, this is, because there's so,
You're elected for more than 4 years now.
Yeah.
You don't have anything better to do than.
We're
As far as-
we're gonna try to minimize it, but, yeah, one of the challenges, you know, as you guys know, is you are dealing with literally hundreds of private property situations, and it's difficult to foresee every situation that can come up. We think that this is sweeping up everything we've learned, practically speaking, for the last 3 years. The reality is, yeah, Tom, it wouldn't be out of the norm if in a year or two down the road, we had something that we wanted to update.
And I think that's good, I think that means we're flexible and we're
I
responding.
think it's really good. I think it's going to be
Okay,
my
okay,
comment.
okay.
You know, I think let's keep flexible.
Well, that was the number one message from the folks at East Bay Mud. They said was, don't be rigid, learn as you go and be willing to update. They said, don't think you're just gonna pass this and be done
Let's
with it.
take some good advice
Yeah,
if we get it.
so it turned out to be the case.
Right, it's similar to our, in my mind, our unpackaging of the projects, right? Like the packaging of the project
We
worked until it didn't work. And then we didn't have any investment in it besides whether it was working.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Mike?
that's
Anything?
I think it was great.
One thing, this is not related necessarily to our lateral grant program.
Correct.
At the same time that you bring this back, can you bring us back some suggestions on the lateral grant that you and I discussed?
Yes, that's a great segue, and we have, so the lateral grant program is established now under a resolution.
Mhm.
That's the mechanism. And same thing, so after several years of practical experience with that, we've identified a number of changes that we would like to recommend to the board. And I think, given the amount of work involved in bringing those back, we probably can bring them back next month. They're not huge. They're things like,
Why do we need three?
yeah, if you're gonna do just the basic $1,500
I don't
bid,
think we need any bids.
don't get 3 bids, just get a contract.
Why do we need a bid?
Yeah.
If they're getting overcharged, that's their problem.
We're going to do 1,500 of a 6,000 or 7,000 or 8,000.
Yeah, so
And
there's,
in the same vein, that gets back to my earlier suggestion of not requiring a visual or a pressure test. You know, one of the guys got, you know, a $1,500 grant, but the pressure test, I don't know what that cost him. It's like,
About $1,000.
so if he's going to replace it,
yeah.
More?
I think pressure test, yeah,
To do-
2,000 something.
Well, they have to do it at the end to prove that it works.
That's usually part of the bid.
Right?
For the
It is
contract.
required.
Contract.
Yeah, contract, right.
at the end,
It's
but
included
not
in
necessarily
that.
at the beginning. Do
Oh,
you think
okay. No, it's not.
Correct.
Those are optional tests, that's what we need to
that?
do.
Okay.
So we will bring you back an updated resolution for the grant program guidelines next month, along with the updated draft of the
That's okay.
ordinance 100.
Okay. Public comment. Seeing none, anything else from the board? Do you have any
I'm
directions?
actually really happy to see this. It
Okay.
it is rather interesting to look at how many changes we're making. There was quite a few.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was being nice though,
Okay.
yeah. so.
And we are, on a side note, we're sharing all of this and certainly encouraging some of our neighboring districts who are in the process of developing their lateral ordinances. We've made it clear that, feel free to take any and all of this and use it as you see fit if it's useful, same as we did with East Bay
We'd
Mud.
like it to be uniform.
Yeah, because to that point, Tom, also.
How do we enforce it with public agencies? We can't put their fine on the property tax. It's going to be persuasion city, right? And that's about it.
Sorry,
How do we
to enforce the
public-
lateral,
Yeah.
you mean the sections of the ordinance related to public?
How do we
health
get a
properties?
public agency like a city to improve their lateral? They've got a bone lateral.
Section 13.
How do we
I'm not sure
enforce it?
there's any carve out in our authority related to public agencies. I understand financially, public agencies argue that they're exempt from certain types of taxation, et cetera, or benefit assessments, as the case
Yeah.
may be. But I'm not sure that our authorities with respect to the facilities that are maintained are somehow, we can't enforce them against public agencies.
We can enforce it.
No, Tom's point is, we can't put a lien on the house.
How do we force a public agency to
What if they
place
just say no?
their bone level?
Right.
That's my question.
You're right, you can't put a lien on it. I'm not sure I mean, I could look into it, but I'm not sure we can't put a fine on them. Say, because I'm not sure why they would be
But we
exempt from that.
can't make a lien though
Right.
No.
on their property tax, which they don't pay unless they've got property outside.
Well, we could put a fine on their Ross Valley Sanitary bill.
We could, and they could refuse to.
And we could approach them and say, listen, you need to be a good.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Well, let's talk about flexible, let's see if we have a problem before we
Yeah.
solve it.
Okay.
Pressure them.
Yeah.
Just a question.
I know, it's fine, no, it's,
No, that's why we thought that it would be best to put the public facilities on a similar track to the HOAs, where they're given plenty of time, they're given clear milestones, and we really try to work with them to bring them along. So we'll have to see how that goes. Yeah, yeah.
right. Okay, thank you very much. Number 8, consideration of approving a joint construction and hold harmless agreement with the town of Sanitary and providing $60,000 for roadway improvements, facilitating construction of the fiscal year 2016-17 gravity sewer improvement project. Greg.
Okay, so this is related to the, well, as you know, we went out to bid for the 16-17 project. We got the one bid, we rejected it, we're repackaging that work. This is the same overall scope of work. And what the situation that we have there is that at the lower end of Butterfield Road, which is the primary entrance and exit point for the entire Sleepy Hollow neighborhood, we have 3 public agencies, each planning on significant public works projects in that area. And we've spent the last year or so working out the coordination of the timing and sequencing of those improvements. And that is with the City of San Anselmo for paving and sidewalk upgrades, primarily on Butterfield, but also on some of the side streets. Marin Municipal Water District with a major water line replacement for an aging water line that they have in Lower Butterfield, and then the Ross Valley projects. And all 3 are quite substantial, and all 3 are going to require restricted use, 1 lane only of Butterfield, with close to 3,000 homes, a couple of churches, a couple of schools, you name it, upstream of those restrictions. So in conversations and planning with the City of San Anselmo, they made it very clear that based on their assessment, there was a need for, really basically the highest possible level of bypass traffic capacity that could be provided. And you have a couple of old roads that are along that bypass route, and it's a real mix. You've got some private roads, some public roads, and the one road that is the bottleneck, in this case, is the road called the Alameda.
Is that private?
Portions of the Alameda are private. Is the whole thing?
Yep.
After the improvements, the town
Will
will accept.
take over. Okay,
So
yeah,
as part of this project.
yeah.
And that road was recently repaved by the owners, so it's not in bad shape.
Yeah, so you've got a section there, which just to add to it is right above one of the elementary schools, which currently is essentially 1 lane. And so in some fashion or another, the entities, either individually or collectively, we're gonna have to address that. The end result of those conversations was that for less than the cost of what Ross Valley would expend doing our own solution for traffic control to make that restricted roadway work, we can contribute funds along with MMWD and San Anselmo as the project lead, and they have taken on an accelerated project that their council, I believe, has already approved, or at least approved, undertaking and pursuing. And so they are going to, under this proposal, we would have a fixed cost share commitment of $60,000. That would go into their funding, and they will take care of permitting, design, construction, and put in place a permanent widening of that stretch of the Alameda. And they will do that this summer, summer of 18, which is very important, because once that's in place, yeah, all of the construction sequencing that follows for the next 3 summers can utilize this, this improved bypass route. So that's what this is about. We've had a series of very successful cost share arrangements with City of San Anselmo over the last 4 or 5 years. We've everything from entire road tear-ups and sewer line replacements. From staff's perspective, I mean, this is really just a result of the 3 entities working well together to phase out all 3 construction seasons. It seemed like a reasonable approach, and it's actually, again, less than what we would pay on our own if we were to just go do this work. So with that, I'll hand it back to the board. I know there's questions and comments on this one. It's important.
Michael?
No, I think it's great that we want to work it out and work well with our other agencies to make this happen and work in coordination, and maybe be the first of many that we do in coordination.
Anything?
Yeah. What we decided was, or what we discussed in finance, was that there's going to be complaints on this project.
No matter what.
There's going to be, our staff report says, a 10-fold increase in traffic on Arroyo. And so, anything we can do to delay that, I'm really in favor of joint, like Michael said, joint agency.
So you want the signs to say Town of San Anselmo?
Yeah.
I was going to say that we should put on the sign that, partial contribution, but now that I think about it, really. But anyway, at least we have a long-term solution, but a short-term problem.
Arroyo is the little one going from Butterfield to Alameda? That's.
Because they can only have 1 lane on Butterfield, and they don't want signs, stop, go there during commute traffic, it'd be backed up.
Right.
But it'll
That's
be
why.
during summer, so there is a school.
Correct. And I believe the outflowing traffic will be maintained on Butterfield using the 1 available lane, and the incoming traffic to the Sleepy Hollow area is what's using the bypass. And it is summertime only. And what we have heard, and Jill Barnes and Catherine can speak more to this, but to your point, Tom, yeah, with the amount of traffic, there's going to be delays and there's going to be some unhappy people. We think our best approach to that is to make sure that the 3 agencies are going out of our way to communicate with with all of the impacted property owners and entities, and also emphasize the point that we have put a tremendous amount of planning in this to. It is going to take 3 construction seasons. There's no easy way to do this, but when we're done, you're going to have upgraded water lines, upgraded sewer lines. You're going to have sidewalks and improved paving where you didn't have it before, and you're going to have improved safety access to the Sleepy Hollow area for public emergencies and so forth as well. So for what it's worth, in your guys' capacity as elected officials, those are some of the points we're trying to share and emphasize with the public.
Well, and I also think what you just said is a really wonderful thing about it. There's going to be one way to come out and another way to go in, and it's not going to be,
Confusing.
sometimes you get to go, lucky you, and then sometimes you're stopped for 10 minutes while you watch everybody else go. I think that just reliability, or
Yeah.
once you know it's going to take you 10 minutes longer to get home every single day, people are going to get used to that.
Plan
instead of,
accordingly.
maybe I hit it right, and maybe I didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we just had this problem with the styrene,
Oh, the
Yeah,
CIDP
so are
work,
we
yeah.
gonna come up with a new plan so we don't get into potential issues with our neighbor? Is that, I thought that was gonna come back to us, maybe Doug, you know?
No, they have, the styrene solution is not an easy one, and the agencies that are using it are using an alternative are few and far between. If you remember, we were the first agency to even ask about it, the Regional Water Quality Board. So I don't think they're ready at the time to have a solution for us. What we are ready for is to better inform the public. And again, it's as I said, it's like roof tar. I find that particularly offensive, and it makes me not feel very good. So when I see one of those trucks, I just go the other way. We just need to let people know it's not toxic. It's not.
Yeah,
You were sitting right there, but you know.
Okay, so we'll have a education somewhere.
Yeah, we're working on, under the communications program, we're working on some materials and so forth to be able to provide on our website. And as we updated the board, I think last month or maybe prior, we've already implemented a series of changes to current projects that are using the styrene-based CIPP methods, or materials, I should say, where we've expanded the notification zones, we've added on-site air quality monitoring, both for individuals and sort of ambient, so that we have data we can share with the public. And we've also changed our standards to include not just the city public works, but each of the public safety entities in the area, so that if police or fire get calls. So those are steps we've taken immediately. And we're looking at other things just to provide like FAQs and so forth that we can share with the public. So that's kind of an ongoing effort. I would
One other
put it that
quick
way.
point, of course, Pam, is that the project to widen the road and then the water project by MMWP will now precede Ross Valley Sanitary project. We're going in there in 20 or 21?
You guys want to?
2019 and 2020.
19, okay.
Summer, two
So
summers.
the point is, maybe between that time, this time, and that time, there'll be some alternate cure-in-place piping. Sure.
Revolution.
Yeah, no, we can look at that.
So one more quick question. Just curious, because I know we've done these other projects with other communities. So how are they presented? Do they reach out to us? Do we reach out to them? 'Cause
They
just,
being,
the municipality, like San Anselmo, like the townships,
right,
neighborhoods.
right,
Because not to pick on San Anselmo,
right.
but I just hear San Anselmo, we're constantly, which is great, because remember when you first started, I said we got to mend these relationships.
Right.
But are the other communities, do they know that we can do these projects together?
Oh, yeah, yeah,
I
no,
just
we,
don't hear anything.
absolutely. So this is a great one. I mean, it's challenging, and in a perfect world, we might have done a few things differently, but I think all the parties have worked in really, really good faith, very cooperatively, and I think San Anselmo in particular, as we've said before, has probably been our most consistently constructive and positive local government partner on projects. I mean, Larkspur certainly, I think, especially in the last year or so, has also been tremendous with their paving program. So no, man, we look for those opportunities everywhere we can.
Okay, because I haven't heard anything about Fairfax, so I just wanted to.
There's not a lot of, so Fairfax, not a tremendous amount of activity right now. We certainly have reached out to the county on a number of occasions and made some good progress there. So no, this is, and as you guys gave us this direction, I think when we adopted the annual business plan, to do everything reasonable at the staff level to improve the coordination of the capital programs with our local governments. And that's what this is kind of under the spirit of, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Greg, and just a question on the numbers here. So the widening will cost approximately $300,000. Correct. They're asking, it's saying, based on this, the town proposes that Ross Valley Sanitary pays 67%, but it's only $60,000, and Marin Municipal pay 33 for 90.
Yeah. You guys want to,
The full project cost is for complete reconstruction of the road. They're going to do drainage improvements. So they're going to completely reconstruct it. Just to do the part that we would need to widen would cost $90,000.
Okay. And they're asking us to pay the entire cost of that widening.
2/3 of it.
The other third is
And the WD would share on that.
large.
No, but I'm saying us and MMWD are paying the entire cost of the widening, but the whole project is 300, so they're asking us to pay approximately 1/3 of the project. Okay.
Well, another question that we had in finance was, what if the project costs more than 300,000 or 90, and our contract is 60,000? It's not based on bids or
it's capped.
It's
All
capped.
right. Okay, any public comment? Any other from the board? Do I have a motion?
I move we approve the joint construction hold harmless agreement with the town of San Anselmo and provide $60,000 for roadway improvements, facilitating construction of the fiscal year 2016-17 gravity sewer improvements project, and authorize the general manager upon review and approval of council to execute the agreement.
Second?
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye.
None. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to number 9, consideration of approving a master services agreement with Interpol Consulting Inc. Incorporated for environmental review, study and permitting services, and approving task orders number 1 and 2.
Okay, so this is, this is regarding is, the district has a pretty steady stream of need for what I'd probably call environmental permitting and review services. And in the past, we've used a mix of different consultants on that, or different outside services. And when we, and we've had mixed results as an outcome with that. We first started working with Integral, at least in recent memory, I don't know if we ever did in the past. They were a sub to Kennedy Jenks, they remain a sub to Kennedy Jenks, I should say, on the Larkspur Landing remediation project. Now, I want to be clear, that's a separate set of work that they're still under contract to Kennedy Jenks on. But what we found working with them on that project was a fairly complicated NEPA-CEQA review that culminated in what's called a mitigated negative declaration. The board approved all of that. This is all kind of completed business. But what they demonstrated during that project was, I think, in my professional view, really one of the highest levels of outside services that we've experienced here in the last several years. Their ability to coordinate and do outreach to some pretty sensitive entities, including the tribal stakeholders, federal resource agencies that are often can be quite challenging to work with, the state agencies. They were just very, very successful in all of that. So we looked at the level of service they provided us during that work, and when we were looking at trying to find a single vendor for our ongoing kind of normal, typical permitting and consulting, or permitting and environmental review, we said maybe it would make sense to do a master services agreement with them so that they are our normal sort of primary go-to for those types of services, similar to how we've done master services agreements with other outside providers. So that's what this was, what you have in front of you. It's structured identically to our other master services agreements, where the master service agreement establishes all the upfront contract terms, and then on an as-needed basis, we generate task orders that specify the scope of work, schedule, and budget, and then those are subject to independent, or not independent, but to separate approval. And if they're above our, say staff's approval authority, then they come to the board. And initially, right now, we saw 2 needs for their services, and that's what task orders 1 and 2 are. And Task order number 1 would be for support related to the conditional use permit with the city of Larkspur for our existing operations base at Larkspur Landing, and for the what we kind of generally refer to as the interim upgrades out there, like the sidewalk and the fencing and some of the paving we wanted to do to get out of the mud out there for our crews. They would assist with that, and they would also take care of what's called the SWIP compliance. That's the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program, which is a state-level program that dictates how you have to handle minimizing stormwater runoff from your sites and so forth. We've been under a SWIP permit out at that site for a number of years, and we've already had a few missteps where we've gotten close to missing some reporting dates and so forth. And they would basically administer and handle all of our SWIP compliance and all of the work with the city of Larkspur to get the conditional use permit in place. And as a bit of a stepping back a little bit for the board, just for context, the operations base that we have at Larkspur Landing was never properly approved by the city of Larkspur. And this is all old history, I don't want to revisit it, but we had made a commitment several years ago with the city of Larkspur to take care of all of that, including things like bringing it into SWIP compliance and so forth. So now that we're close to moving forward with some of those basic frontage upgrades and so forth, this seemed like the time to go ahead and get the proper use permit approvals in place with the city of Larkspur, both as a good faith, action with them, and also quite simply, it's legally required, and they've been generous in the timing, that they've allowed for us to do this. So that would be their first task order. And then the second task order is a simple on-call, so it's just not to exceed $25,000. And that could be anything like from that emergency repair we did in Fairfax, earlier this year, where that was all very sensitive work that we had to get state agency approvals for because of the creek habitat, and those come along pretty regularly for us because of the setting of our service area, right? We have so many of those. So that would just be a not to exceed that we would call on them when we need them. And anything beyond these 2 task orders that's not within, our approval authority under the purchasing guidelines would come back to the board. And with that, I'll hand it back to the board.
Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the plan is to put in the sidewalks and the fencing, right?
Yes.
And that's all they're basically going to do?
No, not all. And this is a little
Make
bit
sure
of
the trucks aren't taking sludge out on their wheels.
Yeah, so there's a package of what we call the interim upgrades that we'd like to get done there, and they roughly include the following. They include about, I forget how many feet, but they include completing the sidewalk along Larkspur Landing Circle, where there's no sidewalk now, from Sir Francis Drake up to the housing areas across from the Country Mart. There's no sidewalk on the right-hand side if you're going past our parcel. And if you go by there on weekends or busy days, it's very common to see people walking in the street there. So we'd be doing a sidewalk there. We would be getting rid of the construction rental fence that we've had in place for, I don't know how many years, a long time. With a, it's not going to be anything super fancy, but a basic new fence that would meet, be okay with City of Larkspur. On the Sir Francis Drake Boulevard frontage, there's actually a fair amount of very damaged sidewalk and some areas in there that we would take care of. And then we would put just some basic blacktop paving into the main driveway and the main turnaround area so that our vehicles and staff aren't working like, if you went out there today, it's really just mud. I mean, it's, we keep putting gravel down, and we live in Marin, and it rains 50 inches a year, and that's just how it is. And the site right now, it's very difficult to maintain SWIP compliance with that kind of condition as well, because we have we have drainage outlets on that site that were built, when it was expected for development. And those right now are, not really in compliance with, with proper stormwater pollution control. So when our vehicles exit that site right now, all of our heavy trucks, they track mud and dirt onto Larkspur Landing Circle Road, which is also, I don't mean to throw us under the bus, but technically that's not, these are all things that are not really compliant with stormwater pollution prevention standards. So they would do that, then a paving, and then the last element would be a second modular to provide basically, showers and changing for the crews who are working in a converted cargo container. And time flies, but at this point, the crew's been working in that cargo container since 2012, roughly, something like that. So that would be the package of interim upgrades that the city would be approving. Now, to be clear, when and if the district chooses to pursue those upgrades is still up to us, but what they'd be doing is getting the approvals in place with the city of Larkspur. So if we elect to do that, and this will come back to the board, this isn't something we're going to go do on staff's initiative, we would have the conditional use permit in place with the city of Larkspur.
So, when all the planning commissioner hats on, is it that complicated? Because usually, I'm sorry, but staff usually does this at the desk. You know what I'm
You mean
saying?
as far as the use permit?
Yeah.
This
building
one's a
showers
little,
and
Well,
It's a-
showers, that would be a
yeah.
trailer or something.
yeah, it's a little more involved. I
Okay.
mean, and there's architectural review of the modular, because now you have all those homes looking down
Oh, yeah.
on the site. So,
You'll get called.
yeah, we already
Yeah.
do,
Put
but,
in a nice landscape.
yeah.
So my other last question is, now if there's any PCBs on the sidewalk or any of
Yes.
the stuff, that's gonna need to be yay or nay?
I can address that. I can address that.
Okay.
We, as part of all of the sampling and testing we've already done out there, those sites, everything that we've just described to you guys has already been vetted and cleared with EPA.
Okay,
They have already recognized that we've shared with them all the data, we've explained to them why we'd like to do those upgrades. We've mentioned that to them from day one a couple of years ago. And so we got very clear buy-in from them that those activities can go forth, separate from the remaining brownfield remediation work. So yeah, which was good.
just for their contract, they can be let go at will, right? They can be terminated.
Oh, yeah,
There's
no,
no
we,
problems.
standard,
Is this 25,000?
no, we're unhappy with their services, it's, 2
Okay.
weeks?
They don't get the money, right?
Because
They don't
they're
terminate.
Yeah.
raising
Standard, we
the
pay them for work done to date, and we can, yeah, we always
Okay.
have a pretty strong termination clause.
Okay, we don't have to go out to bid for this,
Yeah.
right? No.
We do not. But I really just, I don't mean to oversell it, but the level of service from Integral is just, they're a pleasure to work with.
Well, they need to put that on Google. It
We'll
wasn't
put it up,
it wasn't on Google,
Yeah.
I checked.
They're very good to work with, so.
Low ratings.
So of course, this just, man,
Yeah, please.
I mean, it just raises for me, how long are we gonna own this property?
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing, but then when he's talking about it, he's gonna come for approval before they do these things, it's,
Yes.
And, right, and, yeah, how long are we gonna, and this doesn't have anything to do with the cleanup with the EPA to sell the property if we wanted to.
Correct. Now, this will, having paving in place for that driveway will help with the SWIP requirements if and when the remediation takes place, because
Okay.
the remediation will basically be, dozens of trucks a
Driving
day.
trucks.
And every one of those trucks is gonna have to be cleared of mud and everything before it exits the parcel.
And, I mean, I know that that's not this agenda item, but I'm curious where we are on
Yeah.
that. The Larkspur Landing property cleanup.
should be.
I expect to give you guys an update in April, with board, staff expects to give you an update in April.
Okay,
Right.
very good.
Waiting with bated breath.
Tom?
Okay, I read this and I got completely confused. They got task 1 and 2, and then they go to 1A, 1B. It's a nitpick. But so the Larkspur landing work, so go to like attachment B, it should be task 1A, and then the task 1B.
That's right, they put task 1 and 2 within task order 1.
And so then the budget
They
is.
should have called tasks within task
Should
order.
change it to task 1A.
I see, okay.
And then, because I was trying to find all of the dollars, and I kept going back and forth to that task.
Okay.
Then the other thing is, they have a budget here, attachment B, detailed fee proposal. And it doesn't match their attachment A, you know, so principal, the dollar per hour doesn't match.
Oh, very good,
And
okay.
then the project manager, they don't have listed, I suppose that's the senior.
The,
You see what I mean?
yeah,
Yeah.
we do know the actual project manager will be Bridget.
And she's a senior analyst too.
Yes.
Presumably.
Yeah, we'll double check those and get those verified. We would do that in a fashion that doesn't, I think we can.
Just
commit to
clean
keeping
up.
the cap the same, yeah. Thank you for catching those,
I couldn't add it. And then see task 32, what they really want to say is 2A. That's
Well, what they've done is Dave said, within the task order, they have tasks. They should call it something other than tasks.
Yeah.
Just say job 1, job 2.
Yeah. the name is a little
It's confusing.
Yeah, we'll modify that to make it more clear.
I finally did follow it.
I can choose my language too.
Okay, and what's Mala's? Mala's key on that project. But it was kind of like that, who they got assigned.
So these are.
Bridget is the key person for you, right?
Yeah, Bridget Shields is our key person. She's interfaced already in the past extensively with City of Larkspur staff, and she was the lead on the CEQA mitigated neg deck work that we were describing earlier.
Okay. Anything else? That's fine. So, nitpicking's your
No,
job.
those are, thank you for the attention to details. Very helpful.
It's all about that. Mike, do you have anything?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. So can I have a motion?
I move we authorize the general manager upon review and approval of council to execute a master services agreement with Integral Consulting Inc. for environmental review, study, and permitting services, and including task orders number 1 and number 2, with subtasks.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Who's this?
Second was Tom.
Okay. Finally, verbal reports by board members and staff. Anything from staff?
Let's see, maybe one brief one. I attended a one-day conference last week in San Francisco. It's run by the WEF, the Water Environment Federation. It's the sort of the national organization for wastewater, and a nonprofit called Imagine H2O. And this is the second of these. They put one on last year as well. And the focus is on bringing utilities and companies with innovative technologies and new products on the market to really just spur innovation within the water and wastewater utility industry. So they had a keynote speaker by the name of George Hawkins, who just finished a 9-year stint at DC Water, which is like Washington DC, where they completed by most accounts, I think by all accounts, a pretty incredible turnaround of that agency. The nation's capital had a terrible reputation in terms of water and wastewater infrastructure and service, incredible. The technology and the systems and things that people are bringing to our industry are really something. I'll just tell you, there's new things coming. I think you could look 5 years down the road and see things like CCTV almost being not passe, but substantially changed from what we're doing today. All kinds of really, I'll give you an example, machine learning algorithms for predicting prioritized condition or replacement of water and wastewater lines, There's a test case going on right now with East Bay Mud and City of San Francisco, where they're doing just that to beta test it. So when you hear about some of these kind of way out things like AI and machine learning, the water and wastewater industry is actually embracing them as fast as just about any other traditional industry out there. So there's some really neat things coming down the pipe. That's it.
Okay. Mike? Pam?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I got this from CASA, but this past week, California's Water Regulation Agency approved new measures that will allow recycled water, water that ran through the sewers, to be added to the state's reservoirs. Came out of the San Francisco Chronicle. And the new rules are expected to be implemented by 2023. So that's one way to get some water back in the reservoir. And there's, I think it says 36
Yeah.
indirect potable use.
Yep.
Now that's creative.
Direct potable is coming.
No, this would be more indirect.
Well, I attended that roundtable series on the direct potable uses, and indirect means that they treat it and pump it in the ground,
Up into the
pump it out
aquifers.
a mile away. And direct means they just put it on the So there's any number of places, go to a dry area, and they do it. So it's in our future. Maybe not for Marin, because we don't have a groundwater.
No, because we're very muddy, we're very clay, like.
Yeah, but
And we have
we could
reservoirs.
pile it into a reservoir.
Yeah.
Except all the treatment plants are down low and the reservoirs are up high, and that's a huge cost.
Pumping.
Yeah.
Well, moreover, right now, our reservoirs really serve the needs of the community. And they're not, even during the drought, we weren't part of the drought. Our reservoirs have plenty of water for us.
Well, 77, 78, they weren't.
Yeah, well, so, every 30 or 40 years, we can look about it. Okay. Mary?
Well, I just wanted to say thanks to Greg and Doug, people I know in Kent Woodlands had an issue with Ranger.
Let's talk about that. Tonya Rhodes and David Goltz.
Dave Goltz, Tanya Rhodes. Yeah.
I have some
And
pictures.
I know your parents, both of them since middle school, and their kids, and they're not unreasonable people, and you guys were on it. I just forwarded an email, and then,
All right.
yeah.
So this was the first thing that Ranger did, and this was about 6 months ago. And that's simply that they accessed
Is
the
that a
land.
road, that's a car they?
There's a tractor.
They drove a truck on there and
And
lawn.
that's fine.
Granted, they
Yeah.
redid all their.
This is not the nice part of the lawn, I'll get to the nice part of the lawn, but what they just kind of threw some seed and left. Now, this is where they pulled up a pipe and replaced it. Now, that looks like a normal street, and maybe you would do that on a normal street because years later, the town will come in and repave it. This is private property, this is her driveway, and it goes up the street like that. This is where they're going to do the new project. And that's what they're afraid about. They're like, if they're treating, because that first sandy, grassy part was not that, it was kind of a downhill, it's not the big deal. But they're like, they're doing that, this is the edge of their pool. And they're like, what has to happen is they have to come in this way.
No, we have an easement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dig up the entire lawn, hang a left at the pool, and go up near the other tracks that I showed you.
Yeah.
And this is the driveway, the other part of the driveway, they'd be coming into that driveway and then hitting the grass, coming into this part of the driveway and then hitting the grass and going up. It's a big project, and if the results of this are gonna be something like that on private, it's gonna, it's not
And the Ranger
acceptable.
guys, it sounded like they weren't very nice.
No.
And years ago, I used to hear that a lot about people, who interacting with Ross Valley Sanitary District staff, and then that's gone, right? Like,
Yeah.
our staff is all fantastic.
That's what they
And
said.
so
They
now
said, "You
Ranger
were
is an
great, Catherine."
extension
They-
of our face to
So
the
what's
public.
what's the solution?
Well, in this case, we've made a clear commitment that everything will be restored to like condition. And I walked that property as well several years back with Tanya because of we were accessing it, our crews were accessing it for cleaning. We weren't doing any damage, but it's like having a sewer, I mean, you got a sewer line running through your front yard almost. And so, and there, just because of the topography, there's no other way to easily reroute this line. So it's a really unfortunate but difficult to solve situation. So that I think the best that the district can do is just to bend over backwards to be
Yeah, have a good
the
relationship.
best possible neighbors, that we can. And yeah, they've been, I think, very patient and understanding.
Well, my question is, what is Ranger gonna do? They can't just run offshore.
Well,
No, they'll be, and so what's happening there is the construction management team, which I think in this case is Valley Cooper, is doing a great job of basically, they are in touch with the property owner, and then they are making sure that the Ranger performance on the property is acceptable and that the finished product is acceptable. So our CM team knows what's expected for the finished product up there.
And what is our commitment to this road?
That's gonna be, I believe, Catherine, I think it's basically gonna be ground down and repaved with a thin layer, so it'll look a lot prettier than that when it's done.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
That's like a temporary patch, I think you could call
Well, that was not going to be a temporary patch.
it. Do you know?
That's a temporary.
That's temporary.
Really?
Yeah, from the construction manager, yeah.
Ranger may not have
Come from the
said.
construction manager. Did you ask that of Ranger? Because I don't think
Yeah.
Ranger felt the same way.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, who knows what somebody, yeah. It definitely was like some
But I
guy
do-
was saying
I
something.
do-
But the board and staff agree
That just needs to be put out, yep. And I want to be clear, Tanya and David were extremely complimentary about Ross Valley Sanitary District, the staff, and Catherine in particular. But also, they did mention you came out a couple of years ago.
Good.
So, we just need to maintain the relationship.
We have a big footprint out right now in terms of construction activity, so we're really trying hard to be responsive and accommodating. But yeah, we're in a lot of places right now.
Yeah.
And it's tight quarters,
Okay.
so.
All right. Anybody else on other issues? The meeting is adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you very much.